Armen and Levack, 104.5 The Team, 104.5theteam.com. UFC 188 is this Saturday, 10 o'clock Eastern on pay-per-view. Live from Mexico City, the headline fight here is heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez going up against interim heavyweight champion Fabricio Verdum. And joining us now is MMA radio host and analyst Richard Hunter. You can catch him on Twitter and Instagram at Richard Hunter for your breaking MMA news and live fight updates. And Richard, my first question is, why is Verdum the interim champion? That's so weird to say.
Yeah, guys, so what happened is Cain Velasquez has been out of action for 2 years now. He is the reigning heavyweight champion, but has been dealing with some lingering, nagging injuries, and so his last fight took place in October of 2013 when he knocked out Junior Dos Santos. Since then, the heavyweight title has been inactive because of his injury. This fight between Verdum and Velasquez was originally supposed to happen last year at UFC 180 when the UFC made their debut in Mexico. And Velasquez had to pull out on a couple of weeks' notice because of the injury. Mark Hunt stepped in on very short notice. Verdum ended up knocking out Mark Hunt, but that fight was deemed for the UFC interim heavyweight title, so that we could at least say we had an active champion in the meantime, and that has led to the delayed matchup of Velasquez and Verdum to now unify that heavyweight title, and that's what we're going to be seeing Saturday.
So, Richard, we've got the classic argument of rested versus rusted. What kind of Cain Velasquez can we expect to see Saturday?
Well, I don't know that cage rust is going to have quite the effect on Velasquez that it would have on a normal fighter who would have had a 2-year layoff. First of all, Velasquez has some of the best cardio in the entire UFC, let alone the heavyweight division. His propensity to put on pressure and aggression and be an early starter is really unparalleled in the octagon. So you couple that with the fact that he trains out of San Jose's AKA American Kickboxing Academy with the now light heavyweight champion of the world, Daniel Cormier. These two are best buddies and training partners. They're pushing each other all the time. I know Velasquez, over this 2-year layoff, has done nothing but train hard, work on his cardio, except for the time that, under doctor's orders, he had to lay off because of the knee surgery. So I really don't anticipate cardio being much of a factor at all for Velasquez. I look for him to be as aggressive as he ever has been.
Richard, we had a chance to catch up with Verdum for a couple minutes yesterday, and his big thing was he's been training in Mexico City. The lighter air is now on his side because he's used to it. Even though the cardio will be tight, will the lighter air affect Velasquez at all?
Always does. The altitude. Now, how much so, I don't know with Velasquez. It's very smart of Verdum, though, to move his training camp down there early and get used to the altitude. I mean, we see the same thing when fighters, take fights in Colorado, for example, or other high-altitude areas. It can really be a factor, and Verdum has really been forward-thinking with setting up his camp down there and really getting a jump start on the altitude adjustment. It was very smart of it.
Heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez going up against interim heavyweight champion Fabricio Verdum tomorrow night, UFC 188, 10 o'clock pay-per-view live from Mexico City. Richard Hunter, MMA radio host and analyst at Richard Hunter, joining us now. And Richard, when you look at this fight between Velasquez and Verdum, break it down for us. Who has the advantages in what areas?
So what you have here is the amateur wrestling pedigree of Cain Velasquez going up against the Brazilian jiu-jitsu submission prowess of Fabricio Verdum. Verdum is one of the best submission specialists in all of the UFC, and certainly the UFC's heavyweight division. Velasquez is a very aggressive, powerful wrestler. I think what this fight comes down to is who can establish their striking game early. Because if this fight goes to the ground, Velasquez will try to hold top position and use his wrestling pedigree to neutralize Verdum, but Verdum is very, very dangerous off his back. For a lot of fighters, you're in someone's guard and you have top position. That's a dominant place to be. Not if you're in Fabricio Verdum's guard. If he's on his back looking up at you, that's actually one of the most dangerous positions you can be in if you're fighting Verdum. What I look for is for both of these fighters to try to establish their striking game. Velasquez has had that for some time. Verdum has improved on that over the last couple of years. His hands, his boxing ability has really improved. The guy who establishes their striking game early will force the other fighter to take shots that fighter does not want to take. When you shoot in for a shot that you do not want to take, a lot of times you're leaving yourself exposed. If that's Cain Velasquez, for example, his neck may be sticking out, and you do not want to leave your neck exposed to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt like Fabricio Verdum. I like Velasquez in this fight to win, but I don't like him quite as much as the 5-1 favorite that a lot of odds makers are making him. I think Verdum has a better shot than that.
Nice. Richard, we're here in New York, the land of no UFC. This fight going to be in Mexico. Just how popular is the UFC in Mexico?
Wildly popular. And, this is a market that was a long time coming for the UFC to start serving, even last year. I mean, the fight just sold out in a matter of minutes. They've got another sellout crowd this time around. Mexico was more than ready to support big-time UFC pay-per-view cards, and just look for them to be returning to Mexico with more and more frequency based on the popularity of these now two cards that they put on down there in Mexico City.
Good stuff. Tomorrow night, UFC 188, 10 o'clock on pay-per-view, live from Mexico City. Velasquez and Verdum is the headliner. And by the way, we're giving away some UFC DVDs within a couple minutes, so stay tuned for that opportunity as well. Richard, the co-main event as well. Two top 10 lightweights, Gilbert Melendez, Eddie Alvarez. Why is there so much anticipation for this fight as well?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. A co-main event, this could very well be the fight of the night. For the casual UFC fan who just likes to see two guys stand and bang, this may be the fight for you. Now, with Gilbert Melendez and Eddie Alvarez, what's so unique about this fight is you've had two guys who only recently have joined the UFC. You know, the UFC over the last handful of years has essentially bought up all the talent, all the top talent that there is in mixed martial arts, save a few. And for the longest time, Gilbert Melendez and Eddie Alvarez were two highly regarded lightweights, some of the top lightweights in the world, but who were fighting outside of the UFC's organization. Gilbert Melendez was the Strikeforce lightweight champion. Eddie Alvarez was the champion over in Bellator. And so for the longest time, people talked about not only when will these guys get in the UFC, but also when will they be able to fight each other. So these are two guys who've been circling around each other for a long period of time, who have been talked about in terms of a dream matchup. And now that both guys are under the UFC umbrella, it has finally happened. And, Gilbert Melendez probably has a wrestling advantage over Eddie Alvarez, but Eddie Alvarez has a very high percentage of takedown defense. That being said, I think Eddie Alvarez has a slight striking advantage here. I think this fight stays on the feet. I think they bang it out. It probably goes to a 3-round decision that will be very close. And for anybody who remembers the Gilbert Melendez-Diego Sanchez war, I think it could be something similar come Saturday night.
Nasty. Can't have a UFC conversation without seeing if you've got any updates on John Bones Jones.
Yeah, so John Bones Jones, the now former light heavyweight champion of the world, after being stripped of his title because of an alleged hit-and-run incident that he was involved in Albuquerque about a month or so ago, is basically tied up in legal limbo now, guys. He's got some serious court dates ahead of him that he's going to have to deal with. He allegedly rear-ended a woman, a pregnant woman whose arm was broken in the collision, fled the scene once, turned around and came back, took some cash out of the car, and fled again. As it turns out, there is now lapel cam footage on the internet of the police officers coming on the scene, and it's very damning evidence. He has been told by the UFC that he is suspended indefinitely. Obviously, the title has been stripped from him. When and if he ever comes back, I think is a big question mark right now. But one thing is for certain, he will absolutely have to have all of his legal entanglements cleared away. And as we all know how the court system moves and how slowly it can operate, that's probably going to be a pretty long period of time before we see him back in action. In the meantime, Daniel Cormier sits atop the light heavyweight division, and it looks like his next title defense is going to be against the mauler, Alexander Gustafsson, who gave John Jones the toughest test of his career and came very close to to defeating him before Jones was suspended by the promotion.
Richard Hunter, MMA radio host and analyst at Richard Hunter on Twitter and Instagram. And let's do this right now. Let's take the first 5 callers at 476-1045. We actually have a giveaway, Richard. We have the DVD of UFC 121, Lesnar versus Velasquez. So the first 5 callers right now, 476-1045, win yourself a copy of the DVD UFC 121, Lesnar versus Velasquez. And I'll put you on the spot here, Richard. Do you remember that fight at all, or those two guys going up against each other?
Yes, I do. That was Cain Velasquez vanquishing Brock Lesnar, who a lot of people thought was next to unbeatable at the time. And that was the fight where we really saw Velasquez emerge not only as a heavyweight champion, but as a formidable force. And we started to see inclinations of a guy that would come to be argued as one of the greatest ever in Cain Velasquez. It was the beginning of the end of Brock Lesnar, and it was the beginning of the heavyweight title reign of the great Cain Velasquez.
Richard Hunter knows his stuff. MMA news and live fight updates at Richard Hunter. Good friend of mine as well. Richard, good talking to you, man, and thanks for your time.
Anytime, boys.